Alright, so the next tool that we're going to be looking at is the frame tool. Now this lets me create some basic frame holders or placeholders that I can use to create wireframes and web designs. I can of course replace these frames later, and I can set a different sort of frame. Also, it could be a circular frame in which I can replace these images. Now these images can be opened placed from directly from my local libraries, or I can use Adobe Stock, the Adobe library, or I can use open libraries for this as well. Moving on, before I move on, let me just delete everything that I've done right before this. Couple of undos so that I can deslice my image and I can remove those placeholders. Let me just put this parrot back in center. Right. The next thing is the eyedropper tool. It lets me sample colors from the image, or basically pick out one color or from one pixel on the image. And if I can click this, let's say if I want to select this red, click on this and the red has been selected over here. Very similarly, if I want to select this yellow, I can do that again and select that color over here. Now I can select different sizes. I can do a point sample, which is basically selecting the color at that very point, or I can do an average of 3 pixels by 3 pixels, and I can do even by 100 by 100 pixels, which is quite a large value. So if I do this over here, you'd probably see, because this is a large value, it is averaging out the green and the reds, and that's why I'm able to see somewhat of a brown color. If I was to do it over here, again, very dirty sort of brown that gets selected because of the multiple colors that are over here. If I was doing it over here, you'd see most of the area has been black, has black colors, and that's why I'm able to see just a black color that has been picked. I can do this using a current layer. I can do with using all layers, or I can use with all layers with no adjustments, and I can do a couple of other options as well. Now, the next tool that's also available over here in this set of tools is something for 3D material eyedropper tool. You can assume that it's very simple to the eyedropper tool, but for 3D material. Now, one other tool that I do use a lot is the ruler tool, which I can click and from one place to another. And if I do that, I'd be able to see in the options bar. You can see right over here, I can see the width or the height, the position of those two items, of those two crosshairs, and I can let this remain, and so that I can justify, I can just see this number from here. I can also use this to straighten the layer accordingly. If I was to do that, if I click on straighten layer, as you've seen before with the crop tool, the parrot's layer will get shifted towards the anti-clockwise side, such that this line gets straightened out. Let's see. Yeah, and that's about it. That's basically how the roller tool straightens layers. Let's undo that. The next sort of tool are note and count tool. I can create a simple note with this, and I can save that in my document. Very similarly, I can do something for count. I can click on 1, 2, and 3, so that this helps basically for me to count sheep, or let's say if I have to count the number of eyes that this parrot has, create this entire thing, clear this entire thing first, and click on the eyes. I can see how many counts are there. I can also move between different options. The different options over here being the color of the text of that number. I can also show the size of the marker, which is basically that circle, and the label, that being the text. I can create all of these and I can save them in a particular group also. Not sure if I've used this ever, but it's used to be, it's something that can be used in the future. And we'll see if that ever comes across. Now the next tool is the spot healing brush tool. Now this spot healing brush tool takes an average from a couple of pixels around the image and averages out the spot that I've clicked on. And this works only on rasterized images. If I click over here, it will ask me to rasterize, and this should be converted. So let's do that. If I click on rasterize, this image has been rasterized, and let's fix the beak over here. It seems somewhat of a white area. Let's see if I can fix this and make this entirely yellow. You can see there is no other tool that I'm using over here, and it's able to select area from around it. I click on it, and it directly averages out the sort of color that should be there on those pixels. So that's basically something for the spot healing brush tool. Now, these set of tools over here, the remove tool, the healing brush tool, spot healing brush tool, content aware move tool, and red eye tool, these are very useful for the photographers. We'll see how to use these tools in specific detail when we are operating with a few portraits to work on. Moving on, let's learn something about brushes. Brushes is a very important artistic feature of Photoshop. With the brush tool, I can select a particular brush. I can also paint over an image or a layer with the kind of selections that I have probably made. And we'll explore this brush tool in way more detail in the upcoming lessons. But essentially, with the brush tool, you can see the different set of options which are also over here. There are multiple types of brushes that can be used. There are different opacities and the modes of multiplication and setting all of these things together. And I can select the color that I would want to paint in, and let's say green, and I can paint it right on top of this. So this is something for the brush tool. We'll get back to into this with very specific detail. Pencil tool is something very similar to the brush, but it's way more thin and it's way more compact in terms of how the visuals are. So that's something for the pencil. There's something for color replacement tool and mixture brush tool. Again, we'll explore these in more detail in the upcoming lessons. The clone stamp tool is another one of these tools that are used to replicate image from one area and paste it onto another one. Before that, let me just undo so that remove one of these nice paintings that I've done. Now let's see if I'd want to create a parrot with two eyes. This one is over. Of course, every parrot has two eyes, but this parrot, I'd want to have this parrot have two eyes on one side. So basically what I want to do is replicate this eye somewhere over here. And what I can use is basically the clone stamp tool. The idea is, of course, to clone an area. I can define an area by clicking on Alt and selecting that tool over there and selecting that thing from the pixels. And then I can paint just very similar similarly to the original source. Can paint a tool that allows me to have one eye over here, or basically clone a set of pixels from one area onto the other. Now, there's no limitation to the number of times I can do that. That basically means I can also have this parrot have another set of eyes. I would want to set up the clone source again for that. When I click on this, now I can set. I can create another version of an eye of this parrot over here. And with that, let's see how the parrot looks like. Oh, okay, very creepy. This is probably very scary for a couple of people. Let me remove that before I lose some audience. Right, so that's basically how the clone stamp tool works. Now, the next thing that we're going to be using is the pattern stamp tool. With the pattern stamp tool, I can select a particular pattern. In this case, let's take something for trees, which are already placed over here. These patterns are accessible, and I can add new or old patterns. I can stamp that pattern somewhere in the background, like this over here. Now, this is a pattern that has already been provided by Photoshop, and I'm able to use this. The idea basically being I can create some parts of the pattern onto this image. It would have been ideal if I was doing this in a different layer so I can play with that layer around later. But let's do that. Let's undo that for now and let's move on to the next set of tools. So let's say now I have the pattern over here that we have selected. I can also use the eraser tool to remove pixels from my screen. Now this eraser is very similar to the brush that I've used earlier. I have certain settings for the eraser, but essentially I can delete parts of the pixels or from the layer by using this eraser tool. Now you can notice what I've just basically gotten through is deleting the entire layer elements and not just part of that layer that was drawn upon. When it erased the entire set of elements or from that layer. So that's what eraser does. Eraser is able to remove all the elements from a particular layer by doing this. Of course, unless the layer has not been rasterized. Let's move on to the next tool, which is background eraser tool. Now I can with that I can erase just the background. And it will retain some of the textures as you can probably see from over here. Now this texturing is done basis the contrast and the brightness of the images, and it's able to remove certain part of the background. I can reduce the tolerance. That basically means the amount of elements or the amount of pixels that are being erased are way lesser and way lower compared to the foreground color. Then there is something for the gradient tool. This tool allows me to create gradient from one side to the other side. We'll get into the details of how this gradient tool also works in detail further, but this is basically to set different colors in a gradient from one to another side. Similar to gradient, there is also a paint bucket, which is, if you've used paint, you probably have used this. Paint bucket drops the entire bucket of paint onto the particular layer. So if I click on this, it will drop this green color, the color that has been selected as my foreground color, and drop it over here on the set of sort of pixels which are over here because the tolerance has been set that way. You can increase the tolerance and drop an entire paint bucket over there. That basically means it selects the matching pixels or matching colors depending on how selections have been made. I can use it as a contiguous, or I can drop it entirely in the selection.